Among all of the aspects of Harry Potter covered, those areas concerning Voldemort and his family are easily the darkest. Some portions of the story could even be considered too dark, or rather adult, for a children's series, though children could easily miss the hints provided. In reading between the lines as an adult, however, Voldemort and the history of his family provides plot points worthy of a Game of Thrones novel. Whether it be rape, murder, or even incest, the origin of Voldemort, let alone his actual life story, is particularly gruesome. That said, his history is also long and fascinating, and many fans were upset to see his story axed from the Half-Blood Prince, during which Dumbledore takes Harry through Voldemort's life story. For those who have only watched the films, or who haven't read the books in a long time, much of you know whose history is completely new. Before we dive into the ick factors that comprise Voldemort's biography, I'm Riley and this is Otherworldly Fiction. On this channel, I discuss books with an emphasis on fantasy and enjoy sharing both opinions and trivia related to Harry Potter and Twilight. If any of that sounds like your cup of butter beer, hit that subscribe button. Posts are on Fridays. To understand Voldemort, it's important to understand his sordid family. Neither of his respective families were what you'd call kind. Even the Riddles, his Muggle family, were considered aloof and haughty. They wanted little to do with others, preferring to hide away in their mansion with their wealth. However, if the Riddles were simply arrogant and cold, the Gaunts were downright terrifying. Descended from Salazar Slytherin, the Gaunt family was overly proud of its heritage, to the point where they wouldn't mingle with others, even to marry. Instead, they had a nasty habit of marrying their cousins, which, over time, led to them being slightly deformed and rather violent. In short, the Gaunts could have given Joffrey Baratheon a run for his money. They were every bit as erratic as the Boy King, with Voldemort's immediate relations being abusive towards one another or nailing snakes to doors. As with Harry, Voldemort has several interesting relatives if you trace his family tree back far enough. It's worth noting that he's a descendant of not only Salazar, but of Cadmus Peverell, the second of the three brothers described in Beedle the Bard's Tale of the Deathly Hallows. Cadmus was described as being arrogant, and those who remember the tale will know that the second brother was the one to inherit the Resurrection Stone. The fact the Gaunts came to inherit the stone is ironic, mainly because, being a mostly unfeeling family, they seldom had cause to use it. Voldemort eventually stole it, but he, being someone unable to feel love, would never have a desire to utilize its power. However, it is conversely a fitting heirloom for the hard-hearted family, given their preoccupation with death. It is even more appropriate for Voldemort, in a way, because the Resurrection Stone represents immortality and the inability to let go. Voldemort, too, is obsessed with immortality, though as he's interested only in prolonging his own life, he turns the ring the stone was housed in into a Horcrux. Moreover, Voldemort's status as an heir of Cadmus gives him another intriguing connection. He is related to none other than his adversary, Harry Potter, who is a descendant of the youngest and wisest Peverell brother, Ignotus. Through both the Gaunts and the Potters, the Deathly Hallows would be passed on. The Resurrection Stone, hidden within a ring, would be passed as a greatly valued heirloom between the Gaunts, while the Potters made a point of passing the invisibility cloak on to their children. Of course, the family connections don't stop there. Focusing on the Gaunts specifically, other members include Corvinus Gaunt, who made a point of concealing the Chamber of Secrets in a girl's washroom. Another notable relative was Rhinoc Gaunt, who was the mother to Isolde Sayer. Isolde founded another magical school, Ilvermorny, relating Voldemort, however tenuously, to another respected wizarding institution. Originally, as with many of the other old pureblood families, the Gaunts were affluent. Unfortunately, they had a gambling problem. Their wealth dwindled so that they were reduced to wearing rags and living in squalor, though this didn't dampen their unhealthy pride. Rhyonoc's line, known as the Irish branch of the Gaunt family, simply died out, as Rhinoc Sayer, Isolt's half-blood daughter, was frightened of her dark lineage. Acting as Ivolmorny's defense against the dark arts teacher and a potential speaker of Parseltongue, the younger Rhinoc made a point of not producing heirs so as to sever the line. However, she was unaware of the English branch of the family, which would eventually create Voldemort. In avoiding marriage or children, Rhinoc mistakenly believed she was the last of the Gaunts. Even within Voldemort's so-called pure side of the family, there were half-bloods and squibs, as Rhinoc's sister, Martha, was a squib and therefore unable to perform magic. Martha, like many squibs, struggled to fit in, and she eventually married a muggle. They're called a no-mage, choosing to live as a muggle herself. As for Voldemort's more immediate relations, which included his grandfather Mervolo and his uncle Morphin, they were less respected in the wizarding community. Living in a run-down home with hardly a nut to their name, they continued to liken themselves to royalty, proclaiming to anyone they could how they were the last surviving male and pureblood descendants of Salazar Slytherin himself. Between them, the isolated family of three, Marvolo and his children Morphin and Merope, did keep two heirlooms. They had the ring, which housed the Resurrection Stone, and Salazar Slytherin's locket. Both relics would later be stolen by Merope's son, Voldemort, and turned into Horcruxes. What happened to produce Voldemort is as ugly a part of the family history as any, with some Harry Potter fans likening it to rape. Merope Riddle, bullied endlessly by her father and struggling to control her magic, was lonely. While it wasn't hard to feel sympathy for her, her actions were morally dubious. She had noticed the handsome Tom Riddle riding by the house, and, infatuated with him, she decided to bewitch the Muggle. Tom Riddle Sr.'s family was wealthy, and he himself was arrogant. However, under the influence of either a love potion or the Imperious Curse, he fathered a son, Tom Riddle Jr., with Merope. He had no say in this affair and was kept in a continual daze, though Merope began to believe, rather erroneously, that Tom's feelings for her had become real. In time, just before the birth of their child, Merope lifted the enchantments on Tom. She hoped if he couldn't stay for her, he would stay for his son, but sadly, with his faculties restored, Tom was all too eager to ditch his controller. Merope, still very much in love with Tom, gave his name to her baby, only to die immediately after giving birth. Despite his hatred of his Muggle relations, their blood was beneficial to Voldemort, as he inherited his father's incredible good looks, eschewing any Gaunt deformities, and used his appearance as an asset to manipulate others. It's only a theory, but it's interesting to consider that Voldemort's lack of feeling may have stemmed from his conception. It's possible that the ingestion of a love potion before fathering a child can result in a child who can't feel love at all, especially given the emotion created by the potion, while intense, is false. There's no way to know for sure, but it's an idea which makes me wonder all the same. After all, even his hard-knock childhood can't be completely to blame, given that Harry endured similar neglect and still turned out kind. Voldemort's story began on December 31st, 1926. Then known as Tom Mervolo Riddle, the boy grew up in Wool's orphanage. His mother had managed to reach the orphanage, only to die there in childbirth. There was no chance to ask her any questions, and so the Wool staff remained ignorant of Tom's family. They simply hypothesized that Merope had been a circus worker. Like Harry, Tom didn't know he was a wizard, or that even such a thing as wizards and witches existed. When Dumbledore came to visit Tom later, in hopes of inviting him to Hogwarts, he had to explain the wizarding world to Tom as Hagrid had to Harry. Whilst there, Dumbledore also learned about Tom, mostly from Mrs. Cool, who indicated Tom was a bully and had somehow hung another child's rabbit from the rafters. These kinds of incidents were described as nasty, and Tom often had altercations with the other children. Despite lacking any training or a word for what he was, Tom already knew he was different. Moreover, he was consciously using his strange abilities, though also to the detriment of others. He could move objects with his mind, control animals, and speak to snakes. He also hurt the other children. When Billy Stubbs angered him, Tom used his power to hang the other boy's rabbit from the rafters. Furthermore, Tom took 2 other children, Dennis Bishop and Amy Benson, to a cave. Though there are no details regarding what he did to the pair, the kids, after surviving the experience, were unable to talk about it. It was only apparent that Tom had done something awful to them, but not what. Finally, if abusing his magical power wasn't enough, Tom was also a thief. He hoarded his stolen treasures in his room, treating them much as he would later treat his Horcruxes. To Tom, they were trophies. This was a precedent to his later behavior, as all of the Horcruxes he amassed were also created from the belongings of others forcibly taken. On meeting Tom, Dumbledore not only invited him to Hogwarts, but warned him against future bad behavior. Then only the Transfiguration teacher, Dumbledore made it clear that lying and thievery were forbidden at Hogwarts. Tom struggled to believe Dumbledore was a wizard, believing he was a doctor coming to take him to an asylum, until Dumbledore exhibited his own magic. Tom was thrilled by the news he was a wizard. Even then, he had a desire to be special, and he noted during this meeting that he disliked his name because it was so common. Ignorant of his background, he also assumed his father had been the wizard and his mother the Muggle. He supposed she was a Muggle because she died, something he believed anyone with magical talent should have been able to avoid. In yet another telling moment, Riddle's assumptions revealed his idea of death as a weakness. Dumbledore decided to watch Tom carefully, though Tom quickly learned to be cautious and he became adept at hiding his true intentions. He was given money from Hogwarts, which enabled him to purchase second-hand supplies. Alone, going by Dumbledore's instructions, he traveled to Platform 9 3/4. The wand he received at Ollivander's, having a phoenix feather from Dumbledore's bird fox, would also come to be related to Harry's. As it was, as reported by Ollivander, a powerful wand, Tom liked it, until its connection to Harry's prevented him from hurting his adversary. Tom attended Hogwarts between 1938 and 1945. While there, he charmed everyone he met. People sympathized with him for his relative poverty, but admired him for his talent. Everyone, including the teachers, became convinced of his great character, and Tom managed to secure both a position as a school prefect and a seat in Slughorn's Slug Club. Professor Slughorn, the head of Tom's house, Slytherin, eagerly collected only students he saw as aspiring to greatness. The admired student still had to return to the orphanage during summer, something he dreaded, making his situation comparable with Harry's, as Harry had to endure the Dursleys and something of his previous bad childhood every summer holiday. Tom's only regret was how open he had been with Dumbledore during their first meeting. While the rest of the school thought he was perfect, Dumbledore knew about Tom's dark side, which made it impossible for Tom to completely pull the wool over Dumbledore's eyes as he'd done with everybody else. Dumbledore still gave Tom a fair chance, but Tom came to resent Dumbledore for having this knowledge over him. The future Dark Lord began to build his army, even while at Hogwarts, recruiting from his fellow Slytherins. These recruits, who would form the Death Eaters, simply posed as his friends at school. Tom didn't actually care about them, but by pretending he did, he could manipulate the others into committing crimes on his behalf. This enabled Tom to break rules while keeping his own record clean, and nothing was connected with his crew. It was through research that Tom uncovered the truth about his bloodline. He lost time researching the name Riddle, only to conclude with some disappointment that his father was the Muggle and his mother the witch. It was through his middle name, Marvolo, that Tom was able to find a connection. On learning he was none other than Slytherin's heir, Tom began to use his infamous moniker, Voldemort, where before he'd hated his name for its commonness, he was now disgusted with how it connected him to a Muggle. In his 5th year, Tom discovered the Chamber of Secrets and gained control of the basilisk. With the chamber opened, Tom murdered those students he saw as inferior. He wanted to finish what his ancestor had started and kill all of the Muggleborns in the school. Among those to die from the basilisk was Myrtle Warren, who we'd later know as Moaning Myrtle. Even in opening the Chamber of Secrets, Tom managed to manipulate the situation to cast himself in a favorable light. Initially, Tom's mission nearly backfired, as the amount of mayhem he caused threatened the closure of the school. If this happened, Tom would be sent to the orphanage indefinitely. As such, Tom salvaged the situation. After calling off the basilisk's attacks, Tom framed Hagrid. The young Hagrid was keeping a giant spider as his secret pet, and Tom convinced the current headmaster, Professor Dippet, that Hagrid's pet, and therefore Hagrid himself, were responsible for the deaths. As the attacks stopped following Hagrid's expulsion and the fleeing of the spider, Tom appeared to be a hero, and he was given an award for special services to the school. Dumbledore, though, while unable to prove Tom's guilt, knew something was wrong. He became more wary of Tom, and believing in Hagrid, he gave the wronged half-giant a position as the school's gamekeeper. Though Tom resented Dumbledore's vigil, which would prevent him from opening the chamber again, he was able to gain more from the first attack. The murder he'd committed allowed him to create the first of his Horcruxes, placing his soul within his diary for future use. Tom's crimes continued to overlap with his school years. During the summer, old enough to travel on his own, Tom visited the Gaunt family to learn more about his background. Once there, he was confronted by his uncle, Morphin. His first impression of his relative was soured by Morphin noting how much like a certain Muggle Tom looked. On learning the truth about the Riddles, an enraged Voldemort stunned his uncle, stealing both Morphin's wand and the Gaunt family ring. From there, he proceeded to the nearby Riddle house, where he murdered his father along with his Muggle grandparents. Once again, Voldemort covered his tracks, first by using his uncle's wand to commit the murders, and then by altering Morphin's memory. Morphin fully believed he'd killed the Riddles. Moreover, his history of attacking Muggles, coupled with his wand's last spell being the Killing Curse, left Ministry officials with no reason to doubt his story. Morphin was given life imprisonment in Azkaban, making him the second person to take the fall for Voldemort's crimes. Voldemort, in his arrogance, flaunted the ring at school. Nobody knew what it was, but he wore it proudly for all to see. Though other wizards had created Horcruxes before, Voldemort was determined to go where others had not. Already fascinated with the idea of creating more than one Horcrux, having manipulated a disturbed Slughorn into giving him the basic info he needed, he turned the ring into the second of his Horcruxes. He planned to divide his soul into 7, as 7 was the strongest of magical numbers. By the time he reached his 7th year, Tom had 2 Horcruxes and a squeaky clean school record. He was made head boy, aced every course, and his accomplishments were such that he earned another award, the Medal for Magical Merit. Even Dumbledore had to concede that Tom was one of Hogwarts' best students. Among the last crimes to be committed by Voldemort during his school years, Voldemort manipulated the ghost of Ravenclaw Tower, Helena, who in life had been the daughter of the house's founder, Rowena. By now, he had the idea that he should possess something of all the founders. Once again similar to Harry, even the heartless Voldemort felt an affinity with the school of Hogwarts. It had been his home. He tricked Helena into revealing the whereabouts of her mother's diadem. It was in a tree in Albania. Voldemort traveled there where, after killing a peasant, he stole the diadem and made it his 3rd Horcrux. Voldemort tried to apply as a teacher at Hogwarts, wishing to use such a position to recruit Death Eaters from the student populace. but Headmaster Dippet, believing Tom was too young, encouraged him to apply again in a few years. The ministry fell over themselves to offer jobs to the brilliant Tom Riddle, but the gifted Hogwarts graduate shocked everyone by taking a menial position at Borgin and Burke's. By now, Voldemort wasn't interested in an impressive career. He cared only about his Horcruxes, and the acquisition of those items he deemed worthy of housing his soul. His career wasn't a glorious one, but it would enable him to search for valuable objects, as witches and wizards were always selling rare relics to the store. Voldemort was great at his job, using his charm to induce those he encountered into selling. One of his clients was Hepzibah Smith, whom he befriended. She was an old woman, but a descendant of Helga Hufflepuff, and, trusting Tom completely, she showed him her hidden artifacts, the locket of Salazar Slytherin and Hufflepuff's cup. The locket had belonged to Moreau previously, though necessity had forced her to sell it. While Voldemort felt the locket, as an artifact of Slytherin, was his by right, his greed didn't stop there. Also wishing to possess the cup, Voldemort poisoned Hepzibah. He then used her house elf, Hoki, as yet another fall guy. Altering the elf's memory, Hoki, who was rather elderly, was tricked into believing she'd poison her owner by accident. With his new trophies in tow, Voldemort quit his job and vanished. Hepzibah's death allowed him to create another Horcrux, while the death of a passing Muggle allowed him to make the other. After 10 years of travel, during which Tom used the title Lord Voldemort, he headed back to Hogwarts to apply, again, for the Defense Against the Dark Arts post. Unfortunately for him, Dippet was no longer in charge. Dumbledore was, and he would not be convinced. Voldemort's appearance had already started to morph as a result of his actions. His good looks were gone, leaving him gaunt and pale. Dumbledore refused Voldemort's application, and consequently Voldemort cursed the position. As a result, for various reasons, no Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher could hold the position for longer than a year. Many believed the job was jinxed, which made finding deserving applicants on such a frequent basis difficult. Though he was refused employment, Voldemort still used the trip to Hogwarts to his advantage. He slipped into the room of requirement, and there he hid the diadem in the belief it would be impossible to locate. Voldemort amassed his army of Death Eaters through a combination of persuasion and blackmail. His lackeys joined for various reasons. Some were as bloodthirsty as Voldemort, craving power or renown. Some were simply bigots, wishing to purge Muggleborns, and others, like Pettigrew, joined out of cowardice as a means to save their own skins. Some were even jinxed, which was a convenient excuse for families like the Malfoys, who would later claimed they'd been tricked into doing the Dark Lord's bidding. After mastering the dark arts and the unforgivable curses, Voldemort became a skilled legilimens. According to Snape, he was the best. Voldemort always knew if someone was lying to him, and he could not only read minds, but replay those memories within the minds of his victims. He turned this art to cruel use, playing with his victims as a sport. When he tormented them to the point where they were begging him to kill them, he would comply. Only one wizard was skilled enough as a legilimens to trick Voldemort. Snape, who would use his gift to act as a spy on Dumbledore's behalf after defecting from the Death Eaters. Well bigoted himself, Voldemort took advantage of the prejudice shown from all wizards towards those such as the giants and the werewolves. Promising them fair treatment and protection, he recruited these entities, along with others, into his army. It was the 70s, and the First Wizarding War had the wizarding community in chaos. As a result of such fear and danger, steep measures were taken. Aurors, instead of being ordered to capture Death Eaters, were given permission to kill them. They were also allowed to use the unforgivable curses, the Killing Curse, the Cruciatus Curse, and the Imperious Curse against their enemies. If this wasn't harsh enough, the ministry denied many wizards a trial. Others, including Sirius, were thrown into Azkaban without a second thought, not even provided a chance in a court of law to prove their innocence. Furthermore, Voldemort's name became taboo. He was given the other monikers of you-know-who, He Who Must Not Be Named, and the Dark Lord. Voldemort's war lasted 11 years, though the power of Dumbledore prevented him from touching Hogwarts. As a result, the school remained a safe haven for wizarding children. Voldemort's Death Eaters also had their hands full against the Order of the Phoenix, an organization created by none other than Dumbledore. The Dark Lord took great care with his Horcruxes, though when using Kreacher as a guinea pig to test the effectiveness of the cave's defenses, he inadvertently revealed himself to one of his Death Eaters, Regulus. Unbeknownst to Voldemort, Regulus, with Kreacher's help, switched Slytherin's locket with a fake and ordered Kreacher to destroy the real one. Other Horcruxes were passed to those Voldemort trusted the most, namely Lucius and Bellatrix. The former kept it in his home, while the latter hid it in her vault and bewitched it. Though both knew the objects were valuable, even they were oblivious to the fact both relics contained a piece of Voldemort's soul. As such, Lucius, in offloading the diary, was more careless than he might have been. As for the ring, it was hidden in the Gaunt Shack. On finding it, Dumbledore was careless. The ring was cursed, and Dumbledore was subjected to this curse when he tried to handle it. In killing Dumbledore, Snape was only speeding up the inevitable. Voldemort had designed the curse so that nobody would survive. Harry's part in the story came 10 years into the war, when Trelawney gave an authentic prophecy concerning one who could defeat the Dark Lord. The baby in question had to be born in July, to parents who had defied Voldemort's forces 3 times, and he had to be singled out by Voldemort himself. Dumbledore heard the prophecy firsthand, but his brother, Aberforth, caught Snape eavesdropping. Snape took the message to Voldemort, only to be horrified on learning the prophecy would endanger the girl he'd always loved, Lily Potter. The prophecy could have been meant for Neville too, as he also fit the criteria, but Harry's fate was sealed when Voldemort made him eligible for the prophecy's 3rd condition, that Voldemort himself should mark him as his equal. Attacking the pureblood family might have seemed like the obvious choice for someone as bigoted as the Dark Lord, but Voldemort, given his own heritage, was naturally drawn to attack the half-blood family, who would be most like him. Already, Voldemort was seeing a parallel between himself and Harry. At least, that was Dumbledore's theory. Voldemort couldn't locate the Potters right away. It was only when Peter betrayed them that Voldemort could enter the home without opposition, as Peter had been given the role of the Potter's secret keeper. Lily and James, having grown complacent in their secrecy, weren't even armed with their wands when Voldemort caught them. However, this didn't prevent Lily from casting a spell of protection over Harry. It was an ancient form of magic, easily overlooked by the unfeeling Voldemort, and so the Dark Lord could only register shock when the otherwise infallible killing curse rebounded on him. Harry was left alive, with a scar and his own fragment of Voldemort's soul within him, and Voldemort was reduced to something less than a ghost. Harry also inadvertently fulfilled Voldemort's goal, becoming his 6th Horcrux. As a spirit, Voldemort's remaining trump card was possession, though fear of the Ministry prevented him from utilizing human hosts. Animals at least provided him a body, though his role as a parasite cut their lives in half. Without access to magic, he couldn't heal himself, and he would have to wait more than a decade for any loyal followers to aid him. He was finally able to take Quirrell's body, because the professor had a weak mind, and had he managed to take the Philosopher's Stone, he would have regained his physical form 3 years sooner. Voldemort's story, whether it be his heritage, his history, or the events leading up to the books, is as dark as they come. Many fans were disappointed in the 6th Harry Potter film, because it omitted so much of such a fascinating, if gruesome, background, though even the books couldn't cover every particular. Even for those of us who have read the books several times, such facts as Voldemort and Harry being related, and Voldemort sabotaging his own relatives, are easy to forget. Do you wish the films had delved further into the Dark Lord's history and character? Would you want to see a TV show or film exploring Voldemort's history? Share your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe. Thank you for watching, and happy reading.